Stanley Hauerwas likes to say that we always marry the wrong person. We always marry the wrong person because the person we are actually marrying turns out to be a different person than the one we had thought we had chosen to marry. And I think it's also true to say that our lives with the person we marry will shape our lives in ways we could not have chosen, simply because we could not have imagined. The same is true for our education. Kenton, I'm here in Clericals to confess to you that I never wanted to take your Intro to IDS course in third year. It was just one of those pesky degree requirements enforced by Wesley Tays that I perceived at the time as an unjust imposition on my freedom to choose the theology courses that I actually wanted to take. I chose your course because I thought I was choosing to complete my certification. What I could not have imagined at the time was the way your course and the courses that would follow it would shape my life's course. Kenton's work changed my life. Not only by providing a critical framework for thinking about the distorted ways we might produce and consume food, but also by providing a set of practices that enable us to embody more faithful ways of eating, practices like starting a community garden. I would never have imagined, as we were drenched in sweat, pulling up sod on North Campus to build that garden, the way that preparing that ground was also preparing the ground for future work. I would never have imagined that 5 years later I would find myself the sole priest in charge of an island 2 kilometers squared with 60 residents, with no road access, no grocery store, no hospital, and no school. A place whose daily life is quite literally governed by the direction of the wind. What do you do when you are asked to minister at the deathbed, not just of a person, but of a community, an entire way of life? How might an IDS course prepare you for that? I'll never forget when one of the island's residents asked me as she gazed into the sea, "Can you imagine what it's like to live in a place where you never get to hear children laugh? What do you think that does to us?" I couldn't imagine, and I couldn't see a solution. And so I just asked, "What do you miss most about the way things were?" She replied, "I miss when we came together as a community. We used to help each other, to mend each other's lobster traps, to shingle each other's buildings, help dig each other's potatoes. Now everyone buys everything. No one does anything for free anymore, and everyone is jealous of everyone else. We all just stay at home by ourselves and complain on Facebook." I listened, and then I went and I asked 59 more residents the same question, and the majority told me a similar story. I don't know much about mending lobster traps. I couldn't tell you how to shingle a roof. But one time, I did help to break sod in a garden. And so after a parish discernment, the church came together to start a community garden. We built a greenhouse and an apiary. We planted a potato field. We grew rows of kale, herbs, and nasturtiums that really nobody knew what to do with. But the farm was never about cultivating things that the islanders could buy, but about cultivating the things that they couldn't: their relationships with each other and the land. People left their screens. They went outside, and they worked, they spoke, they fought face to face, and they even managed occasionally to laugh together. Even the children came back on weekends and helped. And when the harvest was brought in, rather than dividing it based on people's participation, church members decided that they wanted to divide it according to the logic of Jesus' parable of the vineyard workers in Matthew 20, by grace rather than by merit. And so the church held a community feast and gave the extra produce to all the members of the community who came to the table, no matter how much they had helped in the garden. Almost all the members of the community came. Now, it's important to say that the community garden is not a solution to the problem of the community's decline. Rather, the community garden is how the church is attempting to live faithfully in a world where there is no clear solution to the community's decline. I could not have imagined these events as we turned the sod on North Campus. And likewise, without turning the sod at North Campus, without the practices and frameworks of thinking I was given at CMU, these events would have remained unimaginable. In his work, the Anglican theologian and priest Samuel Wells makes a distinction between moral practice and moral formation. Moral practice is what we do when we find ourselves confronted with a situation, like, for instance, being the minister in charge of an island community struggling with its decline. Moral formation is the teachings and practices, the exercises and the disciplines that shape us, so that when we find ourselves ministering to an island community struggling with its decline, we find ourselves in a position to respond intuitively. The real gift of Kenton's course, the real gift of CMU, was not its certification, but its formation. Now, I'm picking on Kenton, but I could also pick on Harry Hubner, whose choice of using Rowan Williams as our textbook in my very first course kindled my theological imagination. Or Irma Fast-Duick, who saw in my writing a love for the sacraments and challenged me not to give up on the Anglican Church. Or Chris Hubner, whose teaching of eschatological social ethics helped me to see how a community can seek to be faithful, whether or not it is effective. I could also pick on Pamela Leach, Jerry Ediger, Gordon Maddies, Gordon Zerby, Carl Koop, Sheila Clausen-Wiebe, and Neil Funk-Unruh, to name a few, as well as countless friends, Gabriella Plenert, one of them, whose shared lives have been just as formative. Today, as Kenton mentioned, I work as the Canon Theologian of the Diocese of Quebec, a schmancy title that basically just means that I'm employed to help keep our church's leadership accountable for the things that we as a church are saying about God. Now, this was a new position in the Diocese of Quebec that was created by our Bishop Bruce Myers, who came to the realization that if the diocese was to make faithful decisions in these times of dramatic change as a church, as a society, and as a planet, we needed to be certain the thinking behind these decisions was informed as much by our theology as by our business management and legal practices. If all you have is a hammer, all you'll see is nails. If all you have is an accountant, all you'll see is spreadsheets. And if all you have is a lawyer, all you'll see is the prevention of lawsuits. But sometimes the faithful thing to do is not the financially or legally effective thing to do. My role is to provide the leadership with another set of tools in their decision-making toolkit, not in competition with the lawyers and accountants, whose forms of knowledge and counsel are both legitimate and helpful, but in collaboration with them, to help clarify the kinds of reasoning by which we are making our decisions. At times, I also work with individual congregations, like the one on Entry Island, to help them discern how they can take up the gifts that God has already given them, to faithfully live in the time that God has given all of us. And at times, I often think not enough times, it also means the pursuit of my own academic research, which is using theological ethnography to explore how the theologian Willie James Jennings' theological anthropology might help interpret racism and xenophobia in the Quebec context, and how it might help our churches to identify or craft practices that cultivate more faithful senses of belonging. And that is a schmancy way of saying that place, where we are and how we perceive it, matters. It shapes our moral imaginations. This university exists as a place because of the landscape. Because two rivers meet here, precipitating the meeting of a diversity of peoples, including the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, Dene peoples, and the Métis, including generations of migrants we call settlers, like Mennonites and myself. I did not know what I was doing when I chose to join you where these two rivers meet. And that's my way of saying that my time at CMU was a great gift, a gift to which I can only say thank you. Thank you, Kenton. Thank you, professors and fellow alumni. It's an honor to share this stage with you. Thank you to everyone who has played their parts in the story of this place, and to the land itself that has helped and will continue to help shape my story. Above all, thanks be to God, whose power working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine.